Next up, we have Gabriel Koen, who's the VP of Technology at PMC, where he oversees product and engineering for their brand. And he's going to talk about integrating print and digital workflows. So let's welcome Gabriel.
Thank you. So, I think if PMC has a forte, it's been taking traditional print media companies that have struggled to transition into digital and transforming them into a digital-first company. I think even still, there's been problems we've been trying to solve for 5 years now, ever since we acquired Variety back in 2012. And that's how to unify digital and print content management. So looking at this problem, we're taking on a few assumptions. We're assuming that digital first or web first is actually the way to go. We're assuming that there's really only one problem here that we're trying to solve in this unification. And we're assuming that the problem actually needs solving. So I'm going to start by unpacking that a little bit before I get on to what we actually do. So first is digital first. This talk's not about digital first philosophy, but the philosophy informs why the struggle for integrating these tools into WordPress exists and why we keep fighting with it. I think digital first means different things to different people. The textbook definition is along the lines of releasing your content into new media before old media. But that leaves a lot of wiggle room. Now, I think some businesses have a culture that gets digital at a fundamental level. They're much sharper at navigating the space, creating opportunity, and making better strategic choices as a result. Those tend to be digital-only operations. So to those companies, digital first means something on a totally different level. I think the idea for me is digital first means to think progressively. It's understanding how people want to consume your content and making it available to them in their chosen method. Staying in tune with what those methods are, evolving and adapting to modern techniques. It's about taking advantage of the tools that are available to you, whether that's technology or services, knowledge or skills of your people. It's understanding what you, your colleagues, your coworkers, your company are good at. And within that realm of what you're good at, understanding that you can basically do anything that you want with the effort, but there's a separation. It's also understanding what you're not good at and where you need to reach out for help. So these things kind of make up what digital first means to me, just about that progression and evolution. So now that we understand what I'm talking about when I say digital first, next on the list is the assumption that this is the only problem to solve. Now, people say, if we can integrate these workflows, it's going to streamline our business, it's going to solve our culture challenges, it's going to propel the business forward. But a piece of print content, whether it's an article, a feature, sidebar, advertisement, you name it, it gets a lot of changes that are perfected and reshaped once it's actually on the page. It's not just a matter of writing up a piece of content, putting it in the right block, hitting save and you're done. It's creating your piece of content, looking at it holistically on the page within the confines of the design, with the concomitant elements like sidebars, charts, graphs, and when you can see that which is usually done by printing it out, you then there's a dialogue that happens with shaping the content and shaping the design of the page. That kind of dialogue doesn't really exist in web. Within a printed page, you've got some constraints. You've got the page size, you've got the compositional elements of the page, but you've also got a lack of constraints. So on the web, you can't do something that your development team hasn't built yet. And you can't sit over the shoulder of an engineer the way you can sit over the shoulder of a designer and work out the way something is going to look in real time, hit save, and have it good to go. There's a maturity to print tools that just doesn't exist on the web. The print tools assume that at some point in the process, you're going to be printing the thing out on an 11 by 17 paper. You're going to be skimming over it, making notes, scribbling on marks. And then you're going to take those changes and put them back into the computer. And on the web, we tend to be in the business of going into the mission to get people to stay in the WordPress editor and in the WordPress admin. So just the process of editing an article, getting feedback to the author, getting feedback on the design, it's a very different process for print. And on screen you can see essentially a beautiful shorthand language for marking up changes and edits to something. It's entirely for making edits to print. It's way more elegant, way faster, and way more concise than turning on track changes. And you can communicate so much more with just a couple of marks and just a couple of scribbles. That might take you an entire paragraph to type out if you're using something like Word and just trying to mark up your changes and communicate those back. Excuse me. So thinking about it a slightly different way, with digital painting, where you're creating art on digital mediums, it was completely different before you had tablet screens that you could actually draw on and see your changes in real time with an actual pen. People were drawing with programming in individual pixels on the screen. They were drawing with mouses, mice. And you know, you can do a good job, get good results, but you're fighting against your tools. It's a much different experience to draw something with a mouse than with a physical pencil. And one is faster and more intuitive than the other. Another thing is, within print, the idea of packaging content exists in a way that it doesn't on the web. Packaging content is intrinsic to what a print magazine or newspaper is. Issues are themed. For us, when Emmys are near, your issue is about Emmys and it contains Emmys content. Someone may be getting a star on the Walk of Fame. Advertisers take out a congratulations ad. You then have to up the amount of content in the magazine to keep the ratio of content to advertisement. And that process also creates a kind of dialogue and a kind of excitement, both within the company, an organization creating the content, as well as within advertisers who are seeing, you know, people be interested in their advertisements, people who are creating the content being interested in their advertisements. Now, on websites, you don't get that kind of dialogue, you don't get that kind of interaction. You can show related articles, you can categorize things by tag, category, but it's not the same and people don't interact with it the same way. So, just to put a finer point on that, if you open up a print magazine, everything is proportioned with it within a page, including the position of the advertising elements. And the position of those elements are typically done in concert with the content. Versus on web, you have a template, you have a, reverse C shape or L shape, and then your content is the thing that goes in the middle of that. It's a very different dialogue. To digress a little bit, the Nielsen-Norman group did a study of online ads and came up with a list of 5 user requirements for what users felt like made a good or bad online ad. And one that stood out to me was a quote, "I hate disruptive advertising. An online ad should be no more intrusive than a standard magazine ad. That is, it should not flash, demand action, or be placed in the middle of an article." All of these things. Print takes you on a journey. It's produced, it's edited, it's curated into a single binding. Advertising coexists with the content and is, in a way, a welcome part of the content. When was the last time you got mad at a magazine ad? But user behavior on digital platforms is just intrinsically different. The content for both digital and print really is kind of a product of its environment. That difference is present both when the content is being created as well as when it's being consumed. So that kind of leads to the third and last assumption on the list, which is that this problem actually needs to be solved. So for all the talk of print being dead, we see signs that print is evolving and thriving. To say print is dying is kind of like saying music is dying because album sales may be down across the board, or movies are dying because theater revenue is down. That everyone you know listens to music and watches movies. Everyone you know reads. It's not that people aren't using it or don't want to use it or not going after it. It's that the producers and publishers hasn't caught up with what people want to do, how they want to consume it, how they want to absorb it, really, rather than consume it. And we're not giving people enough choice, enough options. The Wall Street Journal started putting out WSJ Magazine a few years ago as a supplement to their newspaper. But since then, it's become a bit of a juggernaut, stands on its own. The latest issue is huge. It's bigger than any of the prior issues. Ad pages in the magazine are up. Revenue is growing year over year. The Stanford Graduate School of Business did a study of their magazine, Stanford Business, and they found that their readers want a print magazine. And they also want the content online. They want content in the form that suits the content, whether that's text, video, audio, photos, infographics, charts, whatever. And that their readers want to receive the same content through multiple channels, depending on where they happen to be at that particular time. Whether that's social media, digital syndication, YouTube, email, you name it. And an interesting side note is we as an industry make a big deal about timing of print content versus digital content. And if we publish online first, people won't buy the print issue or some variation of that argument. But readers are literally telling us they don't care. They just want it. So that leads us to today. And at PMC, what are we trying to solve? I would sum it up with 2 points. So when we try and move the print workflow into WordPress, we're trying to shift company culture to understand and embrace digital in a way that wasn't in that company's DNA before. The other thing is, not specifically as at PMC, but as an industry, we've more or less solved digital content sharing. If we're pushing out feeds to syndication partners or putting out articles on social media, we hit publish in WordPress and it goes out to your mobile app, it goes out to Apple News, your website, Facebook, wherever your channels are simultaneously. We've got a cohesiveness, but we haven't found that cohesiveness for print. And we haven't found how to unify them in the same way. So we haven't built it yet. We don't really know the shape that that looks like. But we at PMC, we've been learning, we've been trying new things, we've been evolving our understanding. And I think the last part sort of applies to everyone who's tried to tackle this problem. It's a little bit, I might call it a moving target, but I would say it's more accurate to say it's an evolving target. It's a changing target. And as we hit one mark, we understand the next move, the next motion, but you can't really see it until you get a little closer. But what happens when you want your digital content to appear in print, or vice versa? I mean, they are disconnected in a way that digital syndication channels just aren't. So here's how it works at Variety. We'll get back to ideology in a minute. So essentially, an idea is hatched. Something new, something topical like HBO getting hacked. You know, discussion of should we cover it? What's our coverage like? What's our viewpoint? What are we saying about it that's going to make this variety, that's, you know, going to be uniquely our voice? So we've got our idea. Idea is good. Next up, the idea becomes an item on an editorial run list. A writer comes up with a headline that's basically a condensed synopsis of what the article encompasses, may have a paragraph about what the story is, some ideas for concomitant information like sidebars, graphs, and infographics. And then it is assigned to a writer. Now, those aren't steps that we're actually trying to solve in WordPress right now. They're just stuff that happens, usually on Post-it notes or Google Docs, wherever the team communicates. But it's around this point, after the assignment is made, before the next step, when the print and digital workflows really start to coincide. So the story comes in usually via email. People will just stick it in the body of an email and hit send to their editor. Occasionally it's in a Word document, but more rarely it's in an actual in-copy document that's ready to be laid out. And that's where we hit one of our earliest hurdles with integrating these workflows. Anything that we could do to try and integrate the workflow added steps to the process. Adding steps to that process adds barriers and hinders adoption. What people do now works. It's fast, it's easy, it's not elegant, but, you know, it gets the job done and nobody has a problem with it. So we as developers or product managers or, you know, digital producers think just file the story in WordPress, but now you've got a whole slew of freelancers who need a WordPress login. Maybe they've already got a WordPress.com account. Maybe they don't know if that's the account they should use. Maybe they're trying to log into your site with their .com account. Like this whole slew of just little tiny issues that come up just from that one thing that you think should be simple. And they'll probably just get frustrated, write it up in Word, and send it over. You get them a WordPress.com account, they log in, they'll probably still write it up in Word and just paste it into the editor. You're not giving them a tool that benefits them. So, essentially, it's not that writers and editors are resistant to change. It's more about value proposition. And right now, we're giving people a really great set of tools that just make their lives worse. It's true. All right, next up. An editor will take the story, they'll move it into InCopy with longer form articles. This probably takes place well in advance of any sort of print deadline. A lot of times they'll create longer form articles just to have in a drawer in case they need more pages on a whim. And For something that's more timely, maybe they'll go ahead and break off the story right here and go immediately into WordPress and publish it on the web while they continue to evolve it for the print version. Generally, that's where the ingestion point of any sort of print workflow integration into WordPress starts, is at this step. And then next, it gets laid out by the art team. They take the in-copy article, create all the layout boxes on the page, link them together, link them with the content, make sure it looks relatively good, confirm the number of pages it's going to take, space they have to work with, etc. The next phase of the article life cycle is where online editing really starts to fall over. So at this point in the print process, the thing's typically printed out on an 11 by 17 paper, given to an editor so that they can actually see it on the page. This is where they make notes, edits, the scribbles you saw earlier. The editor will then make what's called an assignment in InCopy, which is a file that goes out on a thumb drive or a network share. The recipient of that will then go into the InCopy assignment, make further edits. Occasionally, they'll send it directly to the designer who will implement it right there in InDesign. A lot of times, cuts for space happen at that point. And then those steps repeat themselves all the way up until the final proof. So in the final proof, that's where an editor is really looking at things like bad hyphenation, orphans, widows, etc. Now, anywhere within these steps, you could actually fork the process into WordPress or move it into WordPress. So on the digital side of things, content would basically be getting the same treatment. It's going to go into the WordPress editor. People are going to be looking for typos, grammatical errors, etc. But instead of looking for widows and hyphenation, you're going to be making sure that the headline fits into the carousel or that the right tags and categories are assigned. Sometimes you may take a version of an article that's been edited for size and sent to print and put that edited version into WordPress. Other times they'll make the opportunity to say, okay, we had to cut it down over here, but over here we can give the full story, the full length. There's a mutability, a flexibility in this process, and that's probably the #1 difficulty we encountered when trying to get adoption of print workflow integration within WordPress. There's a lot of, well, there's a maturity of the print tools that just doesn't exist on web, and this is made for a completely different purpose than InDesign or even Word. And trying to get them to fit together, you lose some of that flexibility. Print, the process around creating an article for print is very visual. It's very human to human. It's got a more organic feel than, hitting save and sending a link over to somebody. Another place where we kind of create this inflexibility is if you're trying to produce one piece of content and it's going out digitally and in print, and these two completely divergent workflows, you're adding an extra dimension of complexity to a whole slew of people's jobs. Now they've got, trying to keep the content in sync is way more difficult. We actually tried to solve this by specifically creating a very clear fork in the content and having it be a choice to say this content is ready for web or it's starting on web and it's ready for print. And then once it hits that point, you essentially have to make your changes in 2 different places. I felt like that's okay because people would try and choose a point, we thought, try and choose a point where the content's going to take a slightly different shape for print and a slightly different shape for web. So back to our toolkit a little bit. Throughout the entire process of creating a piece of content, we need to keep track of the state of the story. A lot like the standard post meta in WordPress, you need to keep track of who's working on it, the status of the thing, whether it needs an image, which round of edits it's on, etc. And we want to keep track of all that metadata within WordPress as well. There's definitely a correlation there. So in building our toolkit within WordPress, this is an area where we've just recently hit another point in evolution. So we've partnered with a company called SNWorks, which is part of the Michigan State University student newspaper. And SNWorks built an app that integrates with InDesign and syncs content to their own database. So they've actually solved one of the harder parts of the problem of keeping a print file and a database copy of that on the cloud in sync. That gives us back some of the flexibility that we've otherwise lost in trying to put these tools together. And I think I'm very optimistic about it. It's a key point. A key point of improvement in the process, rather. So with this, you can make a change in assignment, you can make a change to the copy, and that change gets reflected near real time in either WordPress or InDesign. So where does this leave us? Our understanding of what it means to integrate print and digital is evolving. I think we can find a unity between digital and print the same way that we had to find a unity between desktop and mobile. Mobile is a different language. It's a different language in the exact same way print is. If you look at the usage of mobile, it's still evolving. And the same way people sit on their couch and read books, they're now sitting on their couch reading on their phones. I think publishers are still figuring out how to get mobile right. That means what it means to have a mobile version of your site, what it means to have features and functionality that translate from desktop to mobile, and the difference between having a native app versus web versus syndicated on a channel like Apple News. And the same way that we've learned that over a cycle of many years, we're going to be learning print integration over a cycle of many years. So this is just to illustrate quickly one of the places where our understanding has evolved. It's cut off a little bit, but on the left side is print. That left line represents print content. And on the right side, it represents digital content. When you're thinking of a story for web or print, or thinking of a story, it kind of lends itself one way or the other. As it gets towards the middle part of the process where you're, laying out and creating edits, there's a bit more of a convergence. But then once you get to the final stage of actually putting that content out there, they start diverging again. Now, initially, that's where we thought the problem was. That's where our tools targeted. The point where we're inputting the story someplace. But here's where the problem actually is. The key thing that I think we learned is that we were focusing on the similarities. We were focusing on where there was more of a convergence. and not focusing enough on the differences between the platforms and the differences between the consumption and trends on those platforms. So if I started from scratch today, everything we've done would look very different. The tools we're using are maturing. When we first started this in 2012, the WordPress REST API didn't even exist. When we began our current iteration of these tools last year, the WordPress API wasn't part of WordPress core yet, and certainly not available on WordPress.com VIP where we host. There's a lot of reasons to keep trying to solve these problems. Teams are smaller. There's more of a blurred line between print teams and editorial teams. At some organizations, even within PMC, there's no difference between those teams. And in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense for them to be working on different systems. It doesn't make sense for the company to be maintaining different systems. There's costs involved. Print CMSs are really frickin' expensive. Our current attempt at solving this is not elegant, and it's not perfect. But honestly, that's probably why it has the best chance of working for us now. As developers and product managers, we start to think that things need to be perfect because we're used to solving problems with technology. But it's equally as important to recognize the differences between your platforms and to understand the difference between print and digital content. That's all.
Okay, well, thank you. We do have some time for questions. If you have a question, let me bring the mic to you so we can get it on video. And we'll ask Gabriel those. Questions? Let's start right here.
The print operations that I've talked to, including the ones that go all the way from WordPress to InDesign, they seem to feel that most of a good hunk of the corrections are found by the print people, and most of those corrections are not print specific. In other words, they need to bubble back somehow to WordPress if there's time. Is that what you find? Anything like that at your organization?
Yeah, I find that personally as well. When I'm creating content myself, I didn't even realize it until I was thinking through it for this talk, but I actually print things out. I find errors, I find problems that I don't catch when I'm reading through it in the screen. They just aren't as obvious, they don't stand out. There's something about it that just makes it faster and easier to see and understand. I think a lot of the writers and editors at any of our brands would agree. That's, again, one of the key reasons why we've struggled to get the right tools into WordPress to help them.
I just kind of wondered how you factored in kind of the cultural issues that exist, that some of these are almost ingrained into working in these specific products, and you can develop technology all day long, but that's not really solving the cultural issues that exist, and kind of how you manage that and view it. It's
hard. You're dealing with people. You can't really fix people the way you can with code. I think the thing that helps is this mentality. A lot of the concepts I spoke on, it comes from our CEO down. So when we're starting a new brand or acquiring a new brand or bringing new team members on board, within the PMC corporate structure, this mentality is already ingrained, and it's being put out there everywhere. Every time someone from one of these brands or one of these other companies is interacting with someone else, either from one of our other brands or from corporate, they're getting the same message, they're getting the same ideas and the same ideals. But it's a long process, and there's still areas within our company that we're struggling to make that culture shift. It's hard to get people to change the way they think. Especially two of our brands, Variety and WWD. They've been doing it in print in a certain way for over 100 years. That's hard to change.
Really appreciate the sensitivity with which you approach this. I was a magazine editor for a long time, so all of this stuff is very familiar to me. But I think one of the hardest things, and something that we struggle with clients a lot, is just, I guess what I wonder is, what do you think the ideal approach is, or if there is one, maybe not yet, to basically making changes or passing along changes when, you've got a distributed team. Maybe people are individually printing things out, but how do you bring people together on that? What works for you guys?
It's interesting because for our print publications, all of our editorial and design staff are located in the same office. So it's a bit of a different animal in that respect. I think that it's the other thing I'd say is kind of like I was saying earlier, I'm not sure that we've actually found a way to solve that yet. I think we're only now becoming aware of some of the nuance of some of these issues. And I think it's going to just take further iteration to try and find that solution. So, no good answer.
I have a question about your run list and how you keep that organized and communicate what people are working on, when it's being published online versus when it's being published in print. Do you have a good solution for that? That's kind of our biggest struggle, is that every tool is either really focused on chronological for print date or for online date, and how do you have something that, most stories, they don't coincide?
So at WWD, we actually just started using a tool called Airtable. It's just airtable.com. And it's just take a look at it. They have a section on their site specifically to address editorial teams, and it's really helped them organize their content and understand all of those points. Who's working on what, which content is going to be digital only or print only and shared. It's very flexible, but super easy to use from our experiences so far. That being said, I think everyone does it a little bit differently.
Okay, we have time for one last question.
I'm curious if you took any lessons from other legacy media that has been trying to work on this process as well. TV, radio, other elements that have been really going through a very similar struggle. Very different, obviously, but very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Not consciously, I can tell you. Maybe subconsciously, because I know that not only within the technology organization, but within the editorial structure of the organizations, a lot of people are very in tune with other media, whether that's stage. We cover TV, we cover fashion, and there's certainly some gleanings from that, but I can't say that we've actually consciously taken in anything from there. And certainly not had any discussions with folks from those meetings.
Great. Well, thank you again for your time and talk. Gabriel, let's give him another round of applause.
Thank you.